بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والعاقبة للمتقين والصلاة والسلام على سيد المرسلين أما بعد. Alhamdulillah, following on from our last lesson, we started by talking about the background of fiqh, how Islam was passed down onto us. And although this subject of how Islam came to us, how fatwa are passed down, how we know Islam to be Islam, how do we even know that what we're doing is actually Islam, all of these questions are very, very detailed and require a lot of explanation. So based on the background, there's still a lot more to cover. We're seeing as today was Sunday and it's the month of Ramadan, inshallah we're going to start with actually getting into some of the rulings, and inshallah that's where we'll start from today, and hopefully as we go along we'll cover a few of the background details as well. So just before we begin to learn and understand some of the terminologies which many of us will already be familiar with, but to be able to appreciate how these terminologies are used, because as we go forward we're going to be continuously using these terminologies, so it's important that we understand them. So obviously most of these are based on the Hanafi madhab. Many of us may have different understandings, and everybody's welcome to ask now or afterwards if they have any. Many of us may be doing things differently, so it's possible that's because of the people that we follow, or it's possible that it's because of something that we're doing wrong. So this is important to ask and clarify these kind of things. In our madhab, when something is fard, it means it must be done, and we have another thing which is called wajib, which also must be done. Both must be done. So the difference between the two is based on the evidence. So when something is fard, the evidence is in the Quran or based on a hadith which has been passed down by many people in each generation, a very, very authentic hadith called mutawatir, or it's based on the consensus of the scholars. So basically it's based on something which has no doubt in it. So when every scholar in the world comes together and agrees that this thing is fard, then that thing becomes fard, and nobody can debate that, and there's no kind of leeway in that kind of thing. Now in our madhab we have a separate thing called wajib. So we have fard and wajib. Now these are two separate things. Wajib are those things which are equally as important to do. Just like fasting in the month of Ramadan, you have to do it. If there's a fast which is wajib, you also have to do that fast as well. It's not like you're allowed to not do it. There's still a punishment if a person doesn't do something which is wajib. However, the difference is that the wajib is proven by a source which is not as authentic as something fard. It's not proven by the Quran or something which is undeniable. So the source with which something is proven for something to become wajib is not as undeniable as something which is proven for fard. So this also has a difference in our belief as well. If somebody believes that something which is fard in our madhab, because it's been proven from the Quran, then if somebody denies that praying 5 times a day is fard, then this is one of the fundamentals of Islam. This person leaves the fold of Islam. If somebody denies that fasting in Ramadan is fard, he also leaves the fold of Islam. However, if there was a wajib action and a person denies that that's wajib, then obviously this will not affect his aqidah. He will still stay a Muslim, he will stay within Islam. So these are another difference. So when somebody denies a fard, then because it's proven from the Quran and consensus of everyone, then that person, he leaves Islam. Which is why you find very few things in our madhab are actually fard. Most things we find are wajib. The only things which are fard are those things which every madhab and everybody will agree, these things that have to be done. So if somebody denies those, he leaves Islam. And then wajib is also proven from the Sunnah. So the Prophet ﷺ will have encouraged, maybe there's a verse in the Quran, which it can be in the Quran. However, that verse is not explicit. It has different interpretations. So one scholar says one thing, another scholar says another thing. So because there's no consensus on this and there's no agreement, there's room for dispute, that's why that thing will not be classified as fard. This is the difference between fard and wajib. And then following on from after wajib, in our madhab we have sunnah. Sunnah is something which obviously is preferred to do, and something which the Prophet ﷺ is reported to have done. So we'll find a hadith saying the Prophet done this. Sunnah generally we understand it in two ways. One is the sunnah which we have to do, or we really, really should do, and there's another sunnah which is not as emphasized. In Arabic we call mu'akkad, sunnatul mu'akkad and sunnatul ghayr mu'akkad, and sunnatul mu'akkada wa ghayr mu'akkada. Mu'akkada means emphasized. Always the Prophet ﷺ would do it. For example, the sunnah of fajr, the ahadith which come with that are very, very severe, and the Prophet ﷺ would always pray these sunnah. And because the Prophet ﷺ would always pray these, we find that it's vital to pray the sunnah of Fajr before Fajr. If a person doesn't pray the sunnah of Fajr, this person will be sinful. And we find this for many other sunnah. The 4 sunnah of Dhuhr as well. Somebody should pray them before Dhuhr, otherwise after Dhuhr. And these are the difference. And then we have certain sunnah which aren't as emphasized. So we find these in Salah as well. For example, after, before Asr, we have 4 sunnah as well. Now these are not as emphasized. We don't find the Prophet ﷺ, it's not proven that he done this all the time, but he would do this regularly. So it's something we should try and follow as well, and also to increase in the way that we pray. So sunnah has these 2 types. Then below sunnah, on another level, we have mustahab. Mustahab is just general preferred actions. If you find a hadith which says the Prophet ﷺ, he would say that "Qul bi yaminik," eat with your right hand. And this is something which the Prophet ﷺ would strongly emphasize. So this would become sunnah because repeatedly emphasized. But if you find a similar hadith but it only comes in 1 or 2 places, or the emphasis on it is not as much, and we just know that Islam recommends these kind of things, then that thing will be on a lower level. It will not attain the status of sunnah. For something to become sunnah, it has to meet certain criteria. For example, for it to be able to be emphasized enough that this is something which is sunnah, you should implement it into your life. Otherwise, when something is mustahab, it's on a lower level. Something you do, you don't do, you get rewarded for these kind of things. Then these are the good things. These are the things we are encouraged to do. Then we have another category which is called mubah, which is those things which you're always allowed to do. If you do it, it's good. If you don't do it, it's no problem. After that, we have makruh. Makruh also has 2 types. We have tahrimi and tanzihi. Tanzihi is the minor one. So those kind of things which you're told not to do, however, it's not something which is sinful. It's something which is better to avoid. It's like the opposite of mustahab. So you can do it, it's good, and if you stay away from it, it's better. This is something which is better. And makruh tahrimi, again, the difference between makruh tahrimi and haram in the Hanafi madhab is exactly the same as the difference between wajib and fard. The only difference is something haram must be proven from the Quran or from a mutawatir source, from a source which has no doubt in it whatsoever. So if all the scholars come together and agree, then this thing will become haram. Otherwise, everything else we find in our madhab, it falls under makruh tahrimi. So most things we find, again, haram is very few things in our madhab. I mean, you don't find that many things like drinking alcohol and selling alcohol, these kind of things, along with not praying salah, not fasting. When you leave the 5 pillars, and then these kind of things, which are mentioned in the Quran, gambling and these usury, these kind of things are haram. But when you come lower down than that, and there's things which there's always dispute about, they'll be classified as makruh tahrimi, something which is haram as well. You will be sinful for these things, but they're not classified as haram. So this is just a brief overview. So just we have the farad and the wajib, the things you have to do, sunnah and the mustahab, things you should do, then the makruh and the makruh tahrimi, things you shouldn't do, and haram and tahrimi, things which if you don't do them, you become sinful. What's important to understand about this whole boxing thing, all this boxing thing, if we were listening in the last lesson, we'll have understood that Islam wasn't passed down in this kind of way. It wasn't that this is haram, this is halal. Islam was passed down through actions. It was a big religion. The Prophet ﷺ passed away. Everybody there was the Sahaba acting on Islam. They passed away. They passed it on to their kids, just like we got Islam. We didn't go to the Quran and Sunnah to understand our Islam. We learned from our parents. We went to Maktab, we went to a school or something, and that's how we learned our Islam. It was the same at the time of the Prophet ﷺ. And people who are very expert in Islam, they would learn more detailed knowledge on Islam. But the average person would just be following the people around them. So now these things, even at that time, they weren't boxed up. There wasn't that this is haram, this is makruh tahrimi, this. None of these things were boxed up. You just had a spectrum. This is really bad, and this is really good. And there's stuff in the middle which doesn't really make a difference. So this is how it was. Even today we have the same thing. For example, the difference between the Sunnah of Fajr and the Sunnah of Dhuhr, we box them in the same category. We say the Sunnah of Fajr, the 2 Sunnah of Fajr, we say this is Sunnah Mu'akkad. And then we say the 4 Sunnah of Dhuhr is also Sunnah Mu'akkad. But the difference in emphasis is so much. In most madahib, the Sunnah of Fajr are wajib. The farad, you can't leave them out, and you have to read them afterwards. Even if the salah started, you have to pray these Sunnah before. Whereas in our we put them in the Sunnah Mu'akkada category, even though the emphasis is so much more. And even in our madhab, if you leave these out, it's very bad. Whereas if you compare it to the Sunnah of Dhuhr, it's not as bad, even though it's in the same category. So it's a spectrum. It's not necessarily that every single thing in one category is exactly the same kind of ruling. This is something to understand as well. So we may have a certain understanding of a religion, and somebody else may have a different understanding. You have to understand the whole severity of something. You have to go back to the original sources. You have to see how many ahadith there are, what the Quran says about this, how explicit the narrations are. Then so for us to go around and emphasizing too much on a sunnah, or emphasizing on a mustahab, or sometimes something which is makruh, and saying, oh, how can you do this? To overemphasize is something we should always be very, very careful about. If something's haram, we have every right to tell people to stop. If something's farz, we should enforce it. But apart from that, everything else, it could be that a person's taken a different understanding, or it's not as harsh as we think it is. So that's why it's always important to be very careful in how we deal with other people. So if somebody's not fasting in Ramadan, then we have a right to go, you should fast, very strongly, advise and persuade. But if somebody's doing something else which isn't quite as bad, I don't want to give an example on what this thing is, because people may take it in the wrong way and say that I'm belittling something important. But sometimes there's things which aren't actually that important, and they're not fard, they're not wajib, but we give them too much emphasis. So it's important not to overemphasize on anything, and we just stay calm about these kind of things. Now, for a visual, the table, very simple. This is just for us to remember. But this is actually starting the fiqh of Ramadan. Ramadan has many types of, when you fast, there's many types of fasting. Most scholars mention 8 types. And basically you'll have the fard, the wajib, the sunnah, then you'll have the mustahab, then you'll have the makruh and the haram. So they'll have all the types in the same way. We've broken it down. So basically you have the fast which we have to do. There's certain fasts which we have to do. So number 1, the fast of Ramadan, obviously. So these in our madhab, they are fard. You cannot not do these fasts. If a person denies this, he leaves the fold of Islam. And that's fard. And if a person misses fast in Ramadan for a valid reason, he's ill or traveling or something like this, then this person, it's fard for him to make it up. Just as, because the Quran says very clearly, isn't it, in those verses, that if a person, he can't fast because he's traveling, or if he's ill or has a valid reason, then he has to make it up. So making up the farz of Ramadan is also fard. So that's the first row. Then we have wajib, and all we've written there is vows. This is something which unfortunately it's a neglected thing in our culture, in our society. If we look from the Salaf, from the Sahaba and the people at that time, very often they would vow to fast for very long times. So they would say, nowadays a simple example, for example, if somebody's doing their GCSEs, they say, if I pass my GCSEs, I will fast for 3 days, I will fast for 10 days, I will do this. Or I will give, a vow is, I will give a charity of £50, I will do this. This is what you call a vow. When a person does a vow, then that thing becomes wajib on that person, because we find this in hadith. The Prophet ﷺ mentions that a person, he can vow for doing for fasting. So we can all do this as well. If my business profits this much, I will fast for 3 or 4 days, or for 10 days. If my son becomes hafiz, or my son does well in GCSEs or in his results, or he graduates, or whatever good thing, we can say that when this happens, I will fast. And this is something which is very important, and we try and revive this kind of thing. This has 2 types. One, you can fix that I will, if I pass my GCSEs, then I will fast on results day, on the day after results day, and the 3rd day after results day. So for these 3 days. Or you can make it non-specific, and you can say I will fast any 3 days. So these are the 2 types. Then we have the Sunnah Fasts, which are obviously not necessary for anybody to keep, but they come throughout the year. So we should keep these in mind. Usually we're reminded of these. Every Monday, every Thursday, Prophet ﷺ is narrated to have fasted often on these 2 days. The 3 Ayyamul Bidh, 13, 14 and 15 of every month, the day of Arafah, and whenever these days comes, usually they're mentioned, and we mention these days. So we should try and make sure that we fast these days as well. And also there are sometimes when fasting is haram, which is the day of Eid al-Fitr, the day of Eid al-Adha, and then the 3 days of Tashriq, which are the 3 days after Eid al-Adha. So 5 days in the year, it's haram to fast. And this is obviously, some people may be surprised, how can it be haram to fast? How can it be haram to do something good? Just like in the day, there's sometimes when it's haram to pray. Istiwa Shams, before Zawal, it's haram to pray. Some things, Islam doesn't like extremes. Samul Wisal is also prohibited in Islam, to not have iftar and not have sehri, and deliberately leave out food altogether and say for 3 days continuously I'm going to fast. This will not be any ibadah, because it's something which is not encouraged. It's something which as a ummah we're not allowed to do. And we're required to, imagine if Maghrib time comes today, and we're all fasting, mashallah, and then Maghrib time comes, and one person says, I'm going to fast extra hour today. You know, I mean, it's brilliant, but it's not what Islam requires you to do. So Allah's told you to break your fast, so you break your fast. So it's not required. Now, this is something a person may think, oh, this is good, I'm fasting more. But this is not good. This is against this is what we call bid'at. And bid'ah is also a thing which things are categorized in, which requires a separate course and a whole lesson, inshallah, we'll talk about. But we'll briefly cover that, inshallah, as we go along. Now, when somebody fasts in Ramadan, again, looking at the chart, every one of these would have a different intention as well. And the necessity of the intention varies as well. In Ramadan, because it's mu'ayyan, there's two types of fast. One is mu'ayyan and one is ghayr mu'ayyan. Fixed and not fixed. Specified, not specified. Ramadan obviously is specified. Everyone knows the 29, 30 days of Ramadan, they are specified. The qadha of Ramadan will not be specified. So if somebody missed today's fast because they were ill, then the qadha is not specified for the 25th of June. He doesn't have to do it after Eid. It's not that would be non-specific. So these are the two categories you have. Either a fast is specific, for example Ramadan, or a fast is non-specific, for example the qadha of Ramadan. So the niyyah and the intention varies. If the fast is not specific, then you have to do the intention before the sahri time, before fajr time starts. However, if it's fixed like Ramadan, then in our madhab we have this, you're allowed to make the intention up until halfway in the day. This has a couple of benefits. So for example, if a person was to sleep, they were to go home after Taraweeh and just stay sleeping, and they just were oblivious. This is very rare that this will actually happen, but he was just oblivious to the fact that it's Ramadan and he never intended to fast. Then even if he wakes up at 10, 11, 12 o'clock, still he can make intention. Also, if a person has an appointment of, yes?
Good question. Intention, does it have to be verbal? Or?
Yeah, we'll get to that, inshallah. We'll get to that. So if a person has an appointment with a dentist especially, and he can have the appointment in the morning, and then he can go, and if that happens, if he has emergency, best not to have this appointment, but if he does have to have the appointment and he has a filling and water goes down, then at least he hasn't broken the fast, you know. So that way you can make intention that I'm going to go to the dentist because emergency appointment, and if something happens to go down the throat, you don't have to break the fast then. The fast, he never started the fast. And then, because we're allowed to make the intention all the way until midday, until halfway between Fajr, Sahri time and the sunset, then a person can make intention during that time. This is the advantage of having this delay. Regarding the intention, now intention, some people they circulate on lots of, especially on WhatsApp, they circulate a dua for fasting. Now this essentially, وَبِصَوْمِ غَدٍ نَوَيْتُ, it's an intention. So an intention, this is not something attributed correctly to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam either, and it's not something necessary that a person verbally, you know, says. This is with every amal, same with salah, and especially with salah, and especially with Ramadan fasting as well. You don't have to sit there and say, I make intention to fast today for the sake of Allah while facing the Qibla. Some people before salah, they make such a long intention, and you're just waiting for salah to start, and they're standing there saying, I'm standing on my right is Muhammad, on my left is Brother Kawthar, and I'm facing the Qibla, and Allah is up there, and Jannah is on my, all these strange intentions. Before salah, as long as you know you are praying dhuhr salah, 4 fards of dhuhr, you pray. You don't have to say anything. Same with fasting. So verbal intention is not necessary, but you have to know that you're fasting. And because there's so many different types, if it wasn't Ramadan, the intention is very, very important. Because you don't know whether you could be doing a qadha of Ramadan, you could be doing your nadar, your vow, you could be doing your sunnah, and especially if you're doing a wajib or fard and qadha of Ramadan, the 6th fast of Shawwal, inshallah, which we'll emphasize at the end, you have to make intention for that I'm doing intention of these 6 fasts for the reward of the whole year. If a person says, I'm just randomly fasting, that's why intention is important. The main reason of intention is to differentiate staying hungry between staying hungry and fasting. Especially in this country, in the winter, for example, our taxi drivers. Now imagine they work on a Friday night and they go to sleep at Fajr time is 5, 6 o'clock. So they pray Tahajjud, mashallah, and then they go to sleep at 6 o'clock after Fajr, and then they wake up at Zuhr, 2, 3 o'clock. They wake up, pray Dhuhr, pray Asr, it's Maghrib time, and they haven't eaten since Sahri time. So the whole day they've not eaten, but they've just been hungry, they didn't make intention. So this person can't say that I want the reward of fasting, or I have fasted today. So this is the difference, this is the need for intention. You have to know that you're fasting for it to be ibadah. So if you're just hungry, it's not ibadah. However, if you made intention, then it's ibadah.
I'm a little bit confused now, because when we when
Yeah.
we pray behind you, we cannot say namazes or piche imam.
You can say that, of course.
When we are home,
You can
imam.
you can say if you want. I'm not saying you can't say, but it's not necessary. Yeah, it's not something which is fard or sunnah or mustahab. It's not something which is necessary. But if you want to for your itminan, it's fine. Because niyyah in itself is fard, but to verbalize is not fard. This is the difference. Niyyah is fard. It's a fard of salah. You can't have salah without niyyah. Yeah, you can't just go up and down if you don't know you're praying. Most people, alhamdulillah, when they're praying, they realize that they're praying and they know what they're praying. But just to be on the safe side, if somebody wants to say, I am praying dhuhr, so it's fine, inshallah. But there's no need for this. This is not something which Islam promotes, or there's no encouragement for this kind of thing. Okay, inshallah, this is just a very basic, and obviously this sheet just covers the very basic forms of salah. And as we're in Ramadan, obviously we're fasting all the time, and this is just the brief thing. So all we cover today, the types of fasting, the intention, and how we cover any, hopefully, I don't want to confuse anyone, inshallah. If anybody's confused, please clarify your confusion. And also just briefly, the importance of sticking to Sharia. Any kind of bid'at, extra fasting, too much, these things are not something, we should try and stick to what Allah has told us to do. So I hope I've made sense, inshallah. Make that Allah gives me and all of us, inshallah, the ability to understand and act upon what has been said. Wa akhiru da'wana, alhamdulillah, rabbil alamin.
You don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what I'm doing. Actually, I touch. I'm going to conquer it, inshallah. Because my biggest problem is disability with the eyes. Just start circling everything. But what I do now, I do it in little bit bits and bits. So instead of waiting for 2 hours or 1 hour,
Exactly. बहुत खुशी हुई आपसे सुन से, बहुत खुशी हुई कसम।
I do it. I did live it in this motion. That way, it gives my eyes. I had my test yesterday.